says that. I know my way around the road case. I like a decent road case, but bloody hell, your cases are expensive. I like the look of them, but why? Why are they expensive?
They are very expensive compared to the standard cases that you would get, and you can actually buy from our off-the-shelf range that we have, and they are much more economical if you want one of those. But you really don't get any of the customizations that you can have with the Ovation range and the quality that you can get from the Ovation range. And this is defined as a premium product. So if you are just after another easy solution to get and go, Ovation probably wouldn't be the right option for you. And you can always talk to our sales staff to show you a full range of different products that we have off the shelf. But Ovation is really defined as a premium product that is down to details based on your specifications and your customization, and really with the highest quality you can get around the world. So we are taking care of a lot of details and considering a lot of quality points in every Ovation case that we build, and that's the value that you are paying for, really.
Define premium.
Well, in every product, whether it's a case or anything else that you buy, the price comes from the value that you are receiving. And that value could be just your time. So it could be something very soft like your time or your idea, the concept that you have and you want to implement. And that could, for 5-10 years of the age of the road case that is going to be with you on the road or around the show, you will always have that ease of use because it is specified based on what you wanted and designed based on your exact requirements. So some of the value that you get are actually very soft and you would not be able to point at them. But with Ovation case, there's a huge range of value points that we can actually present to the customers, and I can demo some of these to you today. And with those ones, they are not just soft and plain, but you can actually look at them and understand why this case costs twice as much of a similar case that you might get from an overseas manufacturer.
I understand custom case, and that's what I'm after, is a custom case. But there are other custom case manufacturers. One just up the road. So what do you do that's different compared to those guys?
Well, first of all, we are really proud of the design component of our company. We take care of design part of it, and we basically draft every single case based on the concept that you have, a range of full solutions that we have tested and prototyped and made sure they work actually on the physical case. And we also have a very high quality range of material and hardware that you cannot possibly get from other Australian case suppliers, because especially like with the Adam Hall range, we are the distributor, so we make sure you get the best quality material and hardware. And some of those things might not even be visible to you. Some of them are, once the case is made, you do not necessarily see all the nasty parts of it that might be inside or under the laminate or anything like that. But we are proud enough in our quality and in our product that we take care of all of those details for you. Let me just start with the things that are quite visible to the naked eye, and probably the main components of every case is its ply and its bracing. And both of those things, the material that we use is really unmatched in terms of quality and strength. And just to show you an example of that, here I have an example of the high quality plywood, which is fully birch ply, and a low quality plywood, which is a mix of birch and Luan ply. And it's just a type of ply that they use, laminate ply that they use inside the body of the plywood. This one is fully birch. This one, because they are made in China, the plywood, the kind of timber that they have in China is luan, but it's just a different type of tree. So the way they do it is they usually do the filler layers with low quality, low density luan ply, and if they want to take care of it and make it look good, you will have just the top and bottom laminate as higher quality, better density plywood.
It certainly seems a lot denser.
It is much denser, and once you cut it, the cut is much cleaner. So the quality and the density is so high and good looking that whenever we get a chance, we are actually proud of exposing the edging in our cases. Usually when it's a lower quality ply, the manufacturers tend to paint it black just to hide all the crimes under the paint. But our ply, we don't have anything to hide in there. We are happy to leave it exposed if it comes to it. And the layers, the number of layers that you have, because each of these layers are cross-directional. So the more of that crossing you have, the more layer you have, the more crossing you will get from the fibers of the wood, which means the ply itself is much stronger as well. So it's not just about the thickness, it's also about the number of layers that they get, which adds to the crossings of the layers of plywood, and that makes this really dense and strong compared to the Chinese type of ply. Now we have made sure that these are sustainably sourced plywood. They are made in Latvia, and then they are laminated with this protective, scratch-proof layer of plastic, and they have a plastic backing on the back of the ply as well, which again is something that most suppliers just have a paint, or if they are laminating it with the foam or carpet, which is usually the case, they don't care about this backing laminate. But this is really important in stopping any humidity or grease to get into the ply, and it makes the ply much more durable. So even though it's a seal layer, it is sealing the plywood body from anything. And this quality is so high that we are actually very happy to offer an engraving for all of our cases to the customers, because we are not worried about cutting into the body of the ply, because effectively the quality and the density of the ply is the same all the way through. You are not going to cut through the top high quality layer and get into the lower density filler layers. It's always dense and clear.
Fair enough, but I think anybody else using the Chinese ply, from what I've seen, they do the engraving too.
Well, that's one of those things that is going to be a soft quality, because effectively as soon as you cut into the laminate, you have exposed the plywood and the actual timber body of it to moisture. And if the glue quality is not good, and if the density of the inner layers is not as high, you have exposed those layers to humidity and other weathering elements that is gonna, in the long term, ruin the plywood and the body of the case. Now, this is not something you can just present or see, but we know that all of the glue that is used for laminating our ply is actually rated and graded, and it's sustainable glue. And in addition to that, the very fact that a lot of our customers are long-term returning clients, it means that they are happy with what they get. Even 5 years down the line, it's still standing, it's still valid for them, so they like to come back and get the same high quality stuff from us. And that's one of those soft qualities that you're not going to see just by looking at the case. It will look the same engraving, but in long term it will show up the internal layers will start expanding and absorbing humidity, and that will ruin the body of the case. That's why in some older cases you can literally knock down one of the side panels and crack them, because the humidity has got to the flesh of the ply and gone through the laminate. But with these ones you will never have that issue, because they are through and through they are high quality bare plywood laminate. So this is one of the items that we have, which is again the main material being used for making cases. Another item that is about the again quality and strength is the extrusions. Now normal extrusions again make the mechanical structure of a case. I have a low quality or a standard extrusion here, which is an angle extrusion, and I have our Ovation extrusion for the same size. So when they tell you, oh, we are using 34 mil extrusion for the angles, for the edging, the size is the same. So nominally they are exactly the same on the books. But if you compare the thickness of these two extrusions together, this one, which is the Ovation version, has this nice thickness, which is about double the thickness of this one. And it also has this round edging, which means it will have a less chance of knocking on things. And this edging, because it's right at the corner, at the edge of this, it will make it much stronger. So it won't start bowing out when you rivet on it. And you can see that quite easily if you look at the case from which is riveted. You will see that with the thinner extrusion, you have a wave running through the extrusions because the rivet is pulling and the extrusion is basically giving up on under the pressure. But these ones, they will never do that. You will have a straight line, which is just a good evidence to make sure your case is strong and the riveting structure is quite solid. Another feature of these, which is again a product of why they are thick, you can have within that thickness, you can have what we call a rivet channel. So these ones, the rivet basically sits on the surface of the extrusion. So if the two cases are rubbing against each other, the extrusions are effectively knocking on each other, and after a few years you might notice that there are rivets missing from the extrusions. That's because the head of the rivets has been knocked off. But with the Ovation extrusions, the rivets are always sitting inside what we call a rivet protection channel. And that rivet protection channel stops the rivets from knocking on each other when two cases are set next to each other in a truck, for example. And that is really nice because in long term, they will never get knocked off. They're always protected inside this channel. That channel is physically impossible to have with a thin extrusion like this. But when the extrusion is thick enough, you can actually have that recessed step down channel that protects the rivets. So thicker, stronger, visually more pleasing, and protective of your rivets. And that's something that you can easily see on these extrusions. And this is on all of our cases. That's our standard. So unless you specify to our designers that I don't want this heavy duty extrusion, your cases will come with this extrusion. So again, another standard point that you can easily see on our cases. With the same principle of having thicker extrusions, with the male and female lead extrusions that we have, I don't even have the low quality version here, unfortunately. But as you can see, there's an additional thickness to the edging of our extrusion, right where the split line is. This allows us to do a small notch on the edges without exposing the underneath of the extrusion. That little notch, if you have ever been on the road with a truckload of cases, as you start opening and closing these will probably start scratching your wrist because they're quite sharp, and if they are exposed, they will hit on you. But with the Adam Hall extrusions, because it's easy to do a small notch, all of these come with the small notches cut from the corners of them, so the case looks much nicer, and there's no chance of any operation staff cutting their hands on the edge of the extrusion. Again, it's stronger, it's more user friendly, and it is looking good as well because of that extra thickness. So that's with the extrusion. while we are talking about the extrusions, I'd like to show you one more extrusion as well, which we use for setting panels inside the cases. So all the dividers that we set and fit out inside the cases, we use this extrusion for fitting the dividers or panels, internal walls. Now, if you are lucky to look underneath the lining of a case, you will realize that lower quality cases just use a small angle braces to set up the panel, which is effectively about like 10 millimeter of this extrusion on one side, but that increases the chance of that angle bracket coming off or being knocked over in one side. But with this extrusion, the ply is really securely inside it and gets riveted on both sides. And because of that kind of bracing, your internal panel has no chance of coming off. So again, something that we do inside our cases. You might not even see this because it usually gets laminated over or fitted out with foam. But if you look inside, you will see that instead of a 10 millimeter angle on one side, we have a running extrusion running across all the edge of the panel, and it's protecting it from both sides. It's supporting it from both sides. To show you just a show and tell on the quality points that you can see on the case. We just had a discussion on the rivet protection channel on the angle extrusions. We go with the same principle of rivet protection on all the hardware as far as we can provide them. We will have the hardware that is got rivet protection. Sometimes this is called crank feature. So if you hear something being like a cranked hardware, it's the same thing. There's a recessed sort of surface where the rivet sits, and the sitting stops the rivet from knocking on other things when the cases are close to each other, and that protects the rivet from being popped off the case, which increases the life of the case to a great extent. And this is in all of our cases. With the handles and with the casters, we have this backing plate as well. So this is effectively a very large washer for the back of the rivet. So when the handle is being riveted on the case, it's usually on the plywood. So you are really relying on the strength of the plywood for taking the whole load of the case. But if you want to go further than that and make sure the handles can carry quite a bit of load, even when the case is fully loaded and heavy, we can put a washer behind the rivets. Now, putting a singular washer is not always doable, but with this solution, you effectively have a washer around the full handle, so your ply layer would be between those. And once you pop all the rivets around the handle, not only they are protected from the outside with this rivet protection feature around the handle, from the inside, the rivet is kept in place with a full washer or a backing plate, as we call it. And that means if the handle wants to come off under the load, it will have to break through this whole surface, which is much harder to do compared to breaking through one rivet pop at the back. And that's something that we do. And again, these features, this will be completely inside the case and most likely invisible because you won't see it. It will get laminated over. That's this. Things to show you, just a show and tell on the quality points that you can see on the case. We just had a discussion on the rivet protection channel on the angle extrusions. We go with the same principle of rivet protection on all the hardware as far as we can provide them. We will have the hardware that is got rivet protection. Sometimes this is called crank feature. So if you hear something being like a cranked hardware, it's the same thing. There's a recessed sort of surface where the rivet sits, and the sitting stops the rivet from knocking on other things when the cases are close to each other, and that protects the rivet from being popped off the case, which increases the life of the case to a great extent. And this is in all of our cases. With the handles and with the casters, we have this backing plates as well. So this is effectively a very large washer for the back of the rivet. So when the handle is being riveted on the case, it's usually on the plywood. So you are really relying on the strength of the plywood for taking the whole load of the case. But if you want to go further than that and make sure the handles can carry quite a bit of load, even when the case is fully loaded and heavy, we can put a washer behind the rivets. Now, putting a singular washer is not always doable, but with this solution, you effectively have a washer around the full handle, so your ply layer would be between those. And once you pop all the rivets around the handle, not only they are protected from the outside with this rivet protection feature around the handle, from the inside, the rivet is kept in place with a full washer or a backing plate, as we call it. And that means if the handle wants to come off under the load, it will have to break through this whole surface, which is much harder to do compared to breaking through one rivet pop at the back. And that's something that we do. And again, these features, this will be completely inside the case and most likely invisible because you won't see it. It will get laminated over.
What's that do?
You wouldn't even see this to ask about it, to be honest. So in a normal case, the industry standard in a sense is for connecting casters to the caster board and inside the case would be what we call a T-nut. Now a T-nut is effectively a rolled sheet metal which it has the threads inside, so it works as a nut for holding the caster and all the caster board and the whole assembly together. But the way it holds everything in place and stops things from turning is these little prongs. So this will be hammered to the body of the case, to the bottom of the case, and then it's a fixed nut and they can do the bolting from the outside. Obviously, this, even though being the industry standard and being really easy to do this, there are some issues with the normal T-nuts. And one of the main issues is the size of these prongs is really small. So if you do and undo the bolt for a couple of times in the lifetime of the case, after 5 years or so, you will, or if you need to change the casters for any reason, the prongs will start cutting into the body of the ply, and this will start turning. Now, considering that this is usually this has usually laminate or foam fit out on top of it, there's really no easy way of getting to it to stop it from turning, and it doesn't have a way of like stopping it. So even if you get to it, or if it's exposed, it's really hard to stop it from turning, so you can undo the bolt from the outside. Instead of 4 of these, this is what we use. And just the comparison in size and how substantial these caster backing plates are, you can see the difference. Instead of being a small piece of sheet metal, you have this 2 millimeter thick steel plate with 4 nut sets that are machined nut sets, so they are much thicker compared to the rolled T-nut. And they are also, in addition to be pressed into the plate, they are welded as well, which stops them from turning. And the whole thing, because the 4 of them are connected by the plate, they don't have any chance of turning around the axis as well. And now the plate is also being fixed using a rivet in the center. So instead of having that and the bolt sort of assembling or connecting all the layers of the caster flange and the caster board and the bottom of the case together, you have all of that assembly between these 2 points basically. So this bind is way more strong compared to that one, and that, again, this is one of those details that you usually don't see inside a case because this quite often gets laminated over, or you have a foam fit out on top of this. But this is one of those details that we take care of, and we are very proud of it. And the issues with casters do not appear right away. The caster gets loaded and unloaded into truck, or gets knocked off sometimes after a few years. You would want to replace the casters, and then you will realize how much of a trouble you are in if you have used the T-nuts. But if you have this inside your case, that would be as easy as undoing the bolts and redoing them again, and nothing will be sort of going wrong by then.
And what's the center hole for?
The center hole is, so they rivet the center hole into the bottom of the case. They use that to fix this plate, so there's no chance of this coming off of its place when you are doing the bolts from the outside. So you can literally flip the case on its top and replace the casters with easy access without worrying about this coming off or displacing in its dedicated recessed hole basically. So that's part of the design of these plates.
The other advantage I see of that is these nuts are nice vertical. I know I've had problems before when that hasn't been sitting properly perpendicular, or you haven't put your bolt in, and it's easy to cross thread because you've got it going as an angle, or it's not sitting straight, whereas this one's always going to be vertical, isn't it?
Yeah, well, because you have to initially hammer these into the body of the case, that's a bit of a manual work. So you might, if you are not hammering it straight, or if the case is small or this is too close to the body, it's usually really hard to hammer it quite vertical and straight. But with that, you don't have any issue with the alignment. It's always vertical and nicely aligned.
And you're not aware of any other manufacturer in Australia using those?
No other manufacturer does it. And again, the status quo is this solution, which is cheap and easy, but not necessarily the highest quality, and not nearly as much of a lifetime as this solution. So we go for this plate when it comes to connecting the casters. So another sort of piece of hardware that we tend to use when the use case scenario allows is these plastic caster plates. These are to go underneath on the outside of the case, and the caster flange sort of sits in that sort of recessed place. These are really good because when they are a good alternative for the traditional plywood caster board. Now, the plywood caster board is a big, thick piece of plywood that you will see underneath the cases, and most manufacturers use that to connect the casters. And some of them save even on that cheap piece of plywood by cutting basically straight battens of caster board. We always, when it comes to using caster board, we always use the full piece of ply as a whole piece, but when we can, we use these plastic parts, which are first of all looking much nicer compared to the plywood. The alignment and positioning of the casters on these is quite a standard, and this is something that I like to sort of stress over with our choice of hardware for Ovation cases. because with every piece of hardware, we look at it from a systematic point of view. In the situation with the casters, you always have the casters, the caster dishes, the edge of the case, the distance from between two casters, and all of those details and dimensions need to work together nicely. Otherwise, when you are rolling or when you are loading the case, the caster might come out and start catching on things outside the case. With this piece, you always have the standard distance from both edges, and you will always, this caster will always fit right on the caster dish on the other on the top of the case if you are stacking the cases. So these little operational issues that you might see when you are loading your cases on top of each other, stacking them or rolling them in tight places, you will notice a lot of these issues. And with sort of smart designs like this piece, all of those issues are eliminated. And we even try to mimic the same effect and sizing with our caster boards, just to make sure the whole system works nicely compared to just casters being randomly placed in the corner.
It almost becomes its own jig.
Yes, yeah, it creates a good distance for the caster.
I see a lot of these being used on the high-end lighting cases, so like that are made in Europe. So Martin or Claypaky or one of those sort of bigger brands tend to use this on the cases that they produce.
Yeah. The use case scenario that I'm very comfortable using this piece is when we know what is going to go inside the case. If the case is like for lighting cases or any equipment, we already know the weight of the equipment and the distribution of the load on the footprint of the case. So we can easily decide that this would be a good piece of hardware. If the case is a generic packer, or we don't necessarily know what kind of equipment is going to be inside the case, we tend to use the caster board, because the caster board has its own benefits as well. It creates a support in the center point of the footprint of the case as well, which again, when the manufacturers use the battens instead of having a full caster board, they lose that advantage. The case might have torsions and skew under the load, or the center point might be punched when you overload the case. But having a thick layer of caster board to support the bottom of the case will always help with that situation. But if we know what is going to be loaded inside the case with, for example, lighting equipment, that's going to be what we use. It looks really nice and chic, and it is helping with the distances and everything in the caster as well. So the caster assembly, the whole dishes, the plates, the backing plates, everything is designed to work as a whole system together in the best possible scenario. Another piece of hardware that I thought might be useful to just show is the kind of lid stay we use. If you look at even the best manufacturers, they have a full range of hardware for every piece, the lid stay being one of them. And there's a set of different features that, depending on which model you choose, you will have some of those features and not have some of them. In a simple lid stay, which is designed to hold to create like a hinge for the lid, when the lid is hinged like a trunk case, and stop the lid from falling down when the case door is open. A lid stay is a useful piece of hardware. But if you look at a lid stay, there are features that you can have as an add-on to this lid stay. One of them being the heavy duty hinge, which is integrated into the body of the lid stay. The other feature is what we call a support, which is this bar here, which supports the lid and stops it from going further than 90-degree angle. The other one is what we call a click stop. And if you listen carefully, you will see this support bar falling, sort of clicking in place. That clicking action means that when the operator is pushing the lid open, they can feel when the lid is completely open, so it doesn't come back over their head, and it locks it in place. Another feature is the rivet protection, as I told you about before, and that cranking feature, that offset, is to make sure the rivet sits in, and this way the rivet sits in and the top of the rivet doesn't get knocked off when the cases are close to each other. Now, if you go and decide to buy hardware, you will realize that every different variation of the hardware has some of these features and doesn't have the others. The way we choose the hardware to make Ovation cases is always to go for full option piece of hardware, which is usually more expensive. So when we buy a lid stay, we make sure it has the high capacity or high heavy duty hinge. We make sure it has the support bar, we make sure it has the stop click, we make sure it has the rivet protection. And even though that might be a little bit more expensive, which does contribute to the Ovation cases being more expensive, end of the day you can rest assured that you get the best possible quality in your Ovation case that you receive. What else? Should I go ahead?
Go.
Another simple example that can show how you could do the same function, get the same functionality with a cheaper but not necessarily better solution, is with the corner casters. If you look at the different corner casters in the market, the price difference is like 4 times between the most expensive or the highest quality one and the lowest quality one. These casters that we use from the German manufacturer Adam Hall, they have roller wheels that are very strong, very durable. They all have their own bearings, so there's a ball bearing inside the wheel. The wheel doesn't sort of get destroyed after a while. There's no, there will never be any issues with the rolling of the case. The body itself is die-cast aluminum, which is very strong. The casing that you have here is a full unibody of die-casted aluminum. And then not only the wheel could be, you can get the same thing called a corner wheel for a quarter of the price, but none of these niceties and qualities. To have the matching plastic foot for the wheel, you can just use a normal foot, and a normal foot might work fine, but because the normal feet are cylindrical, you have to connect them on the ply. And the way they work is they just offset the bottom of the case, so the case is not tipped when it's on its caster. But we use these, which are effectively the matching section of the wheel which sticks out of the case. They get riveted on top of the extrusion similar to the wheel, so the height is down to the fraction of a millimeter, matching the height, so the case stands quite vertically without leaning to a side. The case will stand quite vertically, which eliminates the any issues with tipping problems, so your equipment is always protected if you set the case to stand up. And the round shape of these helps with them not getting knocked by anything. When you are rolling the case, there might be the chance of the plastic feet sort of catching on things on the ground if you're not leaning the case enough. But with these, you don't have that problem. You have a very workable surface, so even if they catch on something, they're just gonna roll over it like a simple skid. And the sizing is matching the exact profile of the wheel. So if you look at it, They are exactly the same height, very nicely positioned, and that is again one of those quality details that might make it does make the case more expensive, because as I said, this caster with the rolling wheel and with the aluminum die cast casing is about 4 times cheaper versions, and this is a specialized piece that is matching that exact caster wheel in terms of sizing. But using this, we can rest assured that the case will have a much longer lifetime, and during that lifetime you will enjoy using it in all scenarios.
Well, I like two things about that. One, that it goes in the extrusion, so it's hard to rip through.
Yeah.
And two, there's 2 fixing holes, because rubber feet just tend to have the one fixing hole, and often it's just a screw. It's not even a rivet, so it is much easier to knock that rubber foot off than it would be to knock that off.
Yeah. Yeah. About the details that we consider and the kind of innovation we are always hungry for at Ovation. One of these details is to use lightweight material. This material is the latest innovation in the road case or flight case industry. It is much lighter than the plywood board. The material has a honeycomb structure inside, which makes it very strong and rigid. But in addition to that, to create protection against impact, it is sandwiched with 2 layers of composite material with carbon fiber inside them, and that layer of composite gives this a lot of structure, but also a lot of sort of protection against any impact or against any scratching. This material effectively reduces the weight of your case by 40%. Considering that most the body of the case all over is made out of the plywood, so replacing the same case, making the same case with this featherweight composite material will reduce the weight of the case to a great extent. This could be a lifesaver when the case needs to be under a certain weight, especially when it comes to sending your gear as a check-in baggage with the airplane in flight. Usually hitting a target weight for the case and the equipment is critical, and by using this we can create that hit that target weight quite easily.
Can we do a comparison?
Sure.
So 120 grams versus plywood, 360, 380, 360, 360. So 3 times. It's 1/3 of the weight.
Well, the board itself is about a third of the weight.
No, but just a straight comparison.
Yeah.
It's 1/3 of the weight.
And when you use it in the case, considering that there are other hardware and bracings included in the case, that would effectively reduce the weight of your case by about 40% to half, depending on what hardware and extrusions you use on the case.
There you go. Tell us about your rivets.
Sure.
I'd like to know about your rivets. You tell me your rivets are quite good.
Yes.
Tell me more about them.
So we have already discussed the protection channels that we have on the rivet heads, and it goes across the extrusions that we use and also the hardware that we use. They tend to have the protection offset everywhere, but what that protects is just the head of the rivet, and quite the engineering of a rivet is quite important for how tight it can keep the different layers that are being riveted together. And we take care of those details even though that is not visible to the naked eye anymore, and it's usually inside the case or inside the body of the ply, and you won't see it even if you look for it. And one of these details is the type of rivet that we use. What I'm holding here is a standard rivet that you could see on almost all the cases in the market. A standard pop rivet has a stem, and once the pin is or the center steel wire is pulled, it will pop and create a mushroom shape at the back of the rivet, and that mushroom shape is sort of keeping different layers together. So you will always, when the rivet is popped, you will always see a big mushroom at the back of the ply layers, including extrusion or whatever other layers that you might have of the hardware, and that's what stops these layers from coming off, and it compacts them together. Now the issue with that is, first of all, you're losing about 5 millimeter from the internal dimension of your case, which means that 5 millimeter across the case is like a buffer. You won't be able to have equipment in there without catching on it. Imagine if you have a handle inside the case, that basically all of these rivet holes will pop off by 5 millimeter, and you lose that unseen space over the rivets. And if you don't consider that space for your rivet pop, it means that your equipment will keep catching on different things. Not only that, if we laminate on top of that layer with a foam or carpet, if the laminate is not thick enough, you usually notice that there's a bulge everywhere that you have riveted the case, which again means the laminate is not sitting flush to the surface. The gluing is not as good bonding between the two layers of laminate and ply, and again more issues with the dimension. So in order to eliminate all of these issues, we use what is called a groove rivets in the market. A groove rivet is designed not to create a mushroom, so the binding, mechanical binding, is not from the mushroom at the back. It's actually from expansion of this stem inside the hole. So when you pop this rivet, the whole stem expands and tightens and stops the rivet from coming off. That has a few advantages. First one, you don't see that bulge at the back of the plywood, which saves you a space, doesn't create that bulge, allows the laminate to sit flush to the surface and the glue to bind all the way. But also it is stronger because your touching point is not just that point, which is the end of the stem. You have a mechanical binding all the way inside the hole, which is usually 10 millimeter or so in a standard case. So instead of one sort of point, tension point, you have a much larger surface. It's like when you're on your car, you use a bigger tire, you have more friction. So it is much stronger compared to the standard sort of rivet. The top of these rivets, I'm sure you cannot even notice that, but the top of these rivets, the groove rivets, is about double the thickness of the standard rivet, which again helps with it being stronger, works as a much thicker washer, and it doesn't get knocked off that easily. Now, if you ever want to use a groove rivet, there is one constraint, and that is with these groove rivets, the hole in which the rivet is inserted and popped needs to be very precise. So if the case manufacturer is using a manual drill to drill holes on the plywood, the hole is not precise enough to create a nice bond with these rivets. When you want to use these rivets, the holes need to be machined. And because we use at Ovation, we use a CNC machine to drill all the holes on our cases. When it comes to using rivets, we can confidently use the groove rivets and make sure that the mechanical binding is in all the lengths of the stem inside the hole, and just that simple effect creates that many benefits for us. Now the cost of a groove rivet is about 3 times the cost of a normal rivet. This might be just a few cents really, but considering that in a small case you have about 500 to 1,000 rivets used, it becomes sort of a figure that is considerable when it comes to pricing. And again, a very minute detail with a great effect in the longevity and the quality of the case that you get, and something that is quite invisible to the user, to the buyer. But we at Ovation, we pride ourselves of the quality of the cases that we use, and we make sure we always use the best option for you to create the best case scenario for the customer. Whether you can notice it or not, we will take care of the quality of our Ovation cases for you.
Tell me how much that compresses. Is that controlled by the size of the rivet? It always goes to the same height?
Yes. So every rivet is designed to work with a different thickness when it pops. And the amount of like expansion that you have is actually relevant to the thickness and strength of this stem. So when it's pulled, it will give up and break at some point, depending on the pull that you have. Because we use really good quality air-operated rivet guns, again, the pull is always consistent. So whether you use this rivet or this rivet on the floor, the pull will be consistent and the mushroom will be the right mushroom, and the expansion on this rivet will be a consistent expansion. These are designed to provide a specific size, and because of that we use the right size for the right kind of ply.
Because that operates different to that.
Yeah.
Because that pulls in until it hits the surface on the other side,
yeah,
and then compresses to that point.
Yes. So if you are a case manufacturer, one of the ways of making things cheaper is just to use one type of rivet for all the scenarios that you need to rivet things together. And that means that the size of that mushroom at the back will differ, because the engagement thickness or the length of the hole that the stem of the rivet is inside it will be different in different scenarios. So that bulge is always different, because that's how much is outside the hole. With these ones, that's inside. But we tend to use different types of rivets on the floor and use each rivet in its right place and right use case scenario. And our experienced assemblers and builders are also trying to know where to use which rivet. So even though on the outside all the rivets look the same, they might be different types of rivet or different lengths of rivet that are designed for that specific place, whether it's on a hardware, on an extrusion, or on the ply. And we have all of these variations on the floor and make sure the builders use the right one in the right place to have the maximum binding effect on all the components of the cases.
Okay, so that explains why your Ovation cases are more expensive. But can you make them cheaper?
We can make a lot of things happen with Ovation cases because we have an in-house design team. Once you start talking to our design team, they will offer you different scenarios and different options. But end of the day, people who come to buy Ovation, they're not necessarily after the cheapest option. They are after quality and turnaround time, and that is what we try to offer in Ovation. But talking to our designers, you will realize that you can have a look at your design before it is built And if you have any questions about why we are using any of these solutions on your case, our designers are more than happy to explain. We have a very advanced online modeling system with our designs that allows you to review your complete model of your case online before it is built, and that model is exactly the same model that the designers are looking at it, and the same model that the builders are looking at it. We don't have a manufacturing model versus a cutting model versus a client model. Everybody is looking at the same drawing, and once it is approved, you can rest assured that you will get the exact case made for you on the floor. Even though that advanced design system might not be necessarily advised by many people in terms of giving access to that to the clients, but because it is your case and it is designed exactly based on what you want and your requirements and your needs, we allow we enable the users to have a look at it, the customers to review the design before it is built and approve it based on their specific individual requirements.
Well, you sold me. I'd like to order a container load.